Hello everyone and welcome to the JewelleryMaker Academy. My name is Mark Smith and in today's tutorials I'm going to be introducing you all to the world of right angled weave and cubic right angled weave and finally prismatic right angled weave. We're going to be covering all three techniques in these tutorials and I'm very excited to be showing you the pieces that I've made. On my board in front of me, I have items that I'm going to be using in the tutorials today. And it's a really good idea just before you start any project, just to get any bits and pieces together that you think you're going to need. There's nothing worse than halfway through a project, learning that you've missed something and you have to go on the hunt to find it. So everything in front of me is what you're going to be needing. Most important, I think, is this. This is your felt bead mat, because there's nothing worse, because we're going to be using a lot of seed beads in these projects. We don't want our beads going everywhere, so your bead mat is really important and you'll always see me using one of these. Then we're going to move on to needles. I'm going to be using either the Beadsmith or the Tulip needles in size 10 and size 12, so whichever needle you prefer. Then we're going to be using our thread. Now you can either pump for the Wildfire, which is my thread of choice, or the Fireline, and I'm going to be using 6 pound breaking weight for all of the tutorials in today's subjects. Then seed beads, I'm going to be using two sizes. We're going to be using our 11/0s and we're going to be using our 8/0s. And then one of the tutorials I'm going to be showing you how to right angled weave using gemstones. And you're going to need a 4mm round and a 6mm round. Apart from this, otherwise you're going to need a toolkit, and this is predominantly for adding your clasps or your earring wires to your completed pieces. But as you can see, it's not very much items you need at all for these tutorials. So for the first chapter, we're going to head on and I'm going to introduce you to the straightforward right angled weave, and I'm going to be showing you the single row and the mat. So without further ado, come along and join me and we're going to introduce you to right angled weave. So right angled weave is probably one of the most used techniques in the seed beading world alongside peyote and herringbone. It's an incredibly versatile stitch, and in this little tutorial I'm going to show you three variations. I'm going to show you the single row, then I'm going to show you the mat, and then I'm going to show you how to embellish the mat. So as you can see, we've got this beautiful frilly little necklace here, and you can see the pink and white stripes going vertically. They're your right angled weave sections. And then below we have that beautiful gold and black bracelet, which is the matte variation. And you can just see the little black seed beads running through, which is how we embellish. So I'm going to show all three of these beginner techniques. So what I've got is I've got a size 12 needle and I'm working with black Fireline. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to choose a colour. So I'm going to start with the yellow. And the fundamental beading you're going to need to start, you're going to need what's called a picot. Now picot is a diamond of 4 beads. So I've picked up my 4, as I said, I'm using 8/0s. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to slice my work down, leave a little tail. I'm going to tie a single knot, pull it nice and tight, followed by another single knot. And that's more than enough tension to get you started. So you can see at the moment where that knot is. Now what first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew away from that knot. And I always, when I'm doing right angled weave, I sew away through 2. And then I'm completely in the opposite direction from where my tail is starting. So you can see we've got our first diamond, otherwise known as a picot, and this is the beginning of your right angled weave. So for this beginner section here, we're going to repeat the following combination. We're exiting from the top of our last bead. I'm going to pick up 3. I'm going to go round the back of the bead that we're exiting and we're going to sew through. So we've gone all the way around 360 degrees. I'm going to pull our needle like so. So now you can see we have 2 groups of 4. In fact, we've only just added the 3 beads to the last because the first bead was already here. So what we're going to do now is we're in the wrong position. We need to be at our exit bead on this end. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up and we're going to sew through one bead, and we're going to turn 90 degrees, and we're going to sew into the exterior bead. And this is where we get the right angled weave. We turn in directions of 90 degrees. So we're going to exit through. Okay, so now we're back on that outside edge where we need to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat. We're going to pick up 3 beads. We're going to go round the back of the bead we're exiting, and we're going to sew through. We're going to pull nice and tight, and now we have our 3 little picots, our 3 diamonds. And again, we're in the wrong position, so we're going to pick up our work. We're going to sew through 2, so through 1, pull nice and tight, 90 degrees turn. We're going to sew through the last seed bead. So at the moment it looks a bit higgledy-piggledy because we haven't put any exterior beading in. Okay, so it will look like this, don't be alarmed. So we'll do a few more. So I'm going to pick up 3, 1, 2, 3. Going to go round the back and up through, pulling that nice and tight, and then we're going to sew through 2, following the same direction with your 90-degree right angle turns. So I'll do one more. So 1, 2, 3, round the back and up through. We're going to flip our work over, and we're going to sew through 2. So it's always sewing through 2 until we reach the end. Now in the next tutorial, next chapter, I'm going to show you how to do this technique using gemstones with lots of embellishing to make the most beautiful bracelets. But that is the fundamental technique of your right angled weave. So what I'm going to show you now using this little sample is we're going to turn this row into a mat. So what we're going to do is, I like to work anti-clockwise or away from me. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my work so we have all the beads ahead of me. And what I want to do is I want to fill in the gaps going back to where we started with the next row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew again 90 degrees, our right angle, into our next bead. Pull that nice and tight. So we're going to treat this next section as a picot from our first row. So it's exactly the same. So I'm going to pick up 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go round the back through the 8-0 into the next. So we're actually jumping the gap in between. Going to pull that nice and tight. So now can you see we're going to do our next group of 4, but we already have one here from the previous row, and we've already got one here that we've just added from that last picot. So you always have 4 points in your right angled weave section, and as you can see we've already got 2. So all I'm going to do now is pick up 2, and I'm only going to go back through this bead that we're exiting, but also one of the walls of our group of 4. So I'm going to go round through the exterior and then through the bead we're exiting. So now when we pull, you can see that we're joined together. If I pull that a bit tighter, you can see now that we're starting to work. I'm still going to exit the next 8-0, so that's in effect is what's called a step up. So we're going to pull that through nice and tight. So again, we're going to pick up 2 because 2 are already here as part of our group of 4. So I'm going to go round into the side bead, then into the first bead that we're exiting, and then I'm going to step through the next. So we're always going to step through 2. I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And now you can see we're ready for our final square. So I'm going to pick up 1, 2, 3. Take one off, we're going to pick up 2. We're exiting, we're going to go round into the side bead, back through into the base. Pull that nice and tight. And then we're going to sew through, and we're going to do the final in this row. So it's all about changing direction. So now we're going to pick up 2. We're going to go round the back, through 1, through 2. And there's nowhere to go here because we've got to the end of that row. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the position now to go back down the other side. So we're going to go through 1, and then we're going to go through 2, pull that nice and tight, and then I'm going to flip it over. As I said, I like to work away from me in this direction, so you can already see the build up. So for the next row, we just do exactly the same routine. So I'm exiting from this exterior of that 4-point. So we know that we always pick up 3 on our first diamond. So we're going to sew through the back, jump the space into the next available 8-0. We're going to pull that nice and tight. So we now know that from now on we pick up 2 every time. So I'm going to pick up 2. I'm going round the back into the first side bead I encounter, and then through the bead I'm exiting, and then I'm going to jump the gap into the next available 8-0, pulling that nice and tight. Then I'm going to pick up 2, going to go round the back, into the side, through the bead I'm exiting, skip through 1, pull it nice and tight, pick up 2, going to go round the back, through the side, through the bead I'm exiting, going through the last bead, and then we'll just do our final section. So picking up 2, going back on myself through the first side bead I encounter, and then through the bead I'm exiting. So you can see this is quite a quick technique for setting up the mats. So what I'm going to show you now is how to do the stitch but embellish as we're going along, because I like to fill in the little gaps that we've got as we're doing our beading. So we need to get to that outside edge. So I'm going to sew through. And so what can you see? I'm at the position now where I'm in effect, I'm in the corner. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill the gaps as I'm going with 11 O's, and I'm going to go for a black so it's easily to be seen. So before I do any moves, I'm going to pick up a black. I'm going to sew through the first 8-0. So now I'm in the position, I'm at the corner of the picot to start doing my next row. So I'm going to pick up 3 because it's the first one. I'm going to go round the back through the 8-0, not the black bead, just through the yellow 8-0, through the bead I'm exiting, jumping the space into the next available 8-0, like so. Let me just reverse a bit. So before we go through that 8-0, we need to add the 11-0. There we go. So then I'm going to pick up my 11, jump the gap into the 8. There we go. So you can see now we've got the 2 11-0s in position. So I'm going to pick up 1, 2, 3 of the yellow, 2 of the yellow, round the back into the side bead, and then into the base bead. I'm going to pull that nice and tight, and then we've got a gap. So we're not going to jump the gap when we embellish, we're going to add an 11-0. So I'm going to sew into the next 8-0. That's now in position. You can already see these little picots are standing straighter than we did without the embellishing. So I'm going to pick up 2, I'm going to go round the back through the side bead, miss the 11, sew into the 8, and I'm going to fill the gap with a black 11-0, sewing through, pull it nice and tight. Then we're going to add our next 2, so 1 and 2, going to go round the back into the side bead, into the base, pull that nice and tight, and then I'm going to fill the gap with an 11-0, jump across into, and then we're going to do our last group of 2. So round to the side, through, and through the base. So when I pull that nice and tight, if I lay that down flat, you can see straight away, because we're filling in that gap, it gives it more of a sense of uniformity. So we're just going to do one more row of the mat. So I'm going to sew through the 8-0, like so, and then we're going to do our next row. So you can already see that now the gaps are lining much more straight. So we're going to pick up an 11-0. We're going to sew diagonally to fill the gap on that outside edge. Then we're going to pick up our first 3, 1, 2, 3. We're we're going to sew round the back and through. We're not going to jump the gap this time because we need to use our 11/0s to fill the gaps. Going to pick up our 11/0, we're going to sew into the next 8, pulling that nice and tight. Then we're going to pick up 2, going to go round into the side bead, into the base bead, pulling that through. So we've got our next 2 picots in position. We're going to fill the gap rather than jump it with our 11/0. Like so. Then we're going to pick up our 2, round the back, fill in the side into the base, putting that nice and tight. Then we're going to fill the gap rather than jumping the gap with an 11. Then we're going to pick up 2, round the back into the side bead, into the base bead, through the bead we're exiting. And then we're going to fill in our last gap with our 11 into the last bead. And then we're going to do our last 2 to finish off that corner. So round the back, into the side bead, into the base, and tie through. So if I just lay that down now, you can see how this is starting to form a beautiful, beautiful pattern. So imagine if we continued this throughout a bracelet length. And what I'd like to do is I'd just like to fill in all the outside edges. So all you would do is you would get to the end of your bracelet, and then we would pop in an 11/0 into the corner, and then all the way around the outside edge we'll pick up 2 11/0s, which fills that gap beautifully. Or you can use one more 8/0 if you'd rather. Let's fill the gap all the way around the outside edge until we get to the side. We're going to fill that corner with 1 bead. Now can you see this is the 11/0 that was added with our bead, and you'll see that it forms alternate sides. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill the gap with another 11, I'm going to sew into the 11, and then down the side I'm going to incorporate some black 8/0s. And this is all about experimenting with colour and design. You now know the fundamentals of right angled weave, and it's up to you how you then continue to fill in all of the gaps. So I'm going to alternate between 2 11s and an 8, filling in the gap, and then 2 11s and then an 8, 2 11s. So you're on a corner again, so we're just going to use 1 11 up to the top and just repeat it all the way round, and I'll just bring the bracelet across to show you. So this is the completed bracelet. So you can see that once I've got to the top end, I've made a little seed bead loop, which we've covered on other JewelleryMaker Academy tutorials. And then I've gone all the way down the outside edge, alternating between 2 11s and an 8, 2 11s and an 8, all the way around. And you can see it feels just like a very expensive watch brand bracelet on a wristwatch. Absolutely beautiful technique. And then I finished then using my JewelleryMaker toolkit. I've popped on jump rings and a toggle clasp to finish. And probably from start to finish, this probably takes about 1.5 hours to 2 hours altogether. But as you can see, it's definitely worth it. So this is your conventional basic right angled weave, and as I mentioned in the earlier stages of this tutorial, I'm now going to show you a really nice bracelet technique using gemstones to do your right angled weave rather than seed beads. So now we know the fundamental technique of the right angled weave, we're going to elevate it using gemstones. And in this particular little tutorial, I'm using shell pearl, some of my favorite, and an 11/0 seed bead. So we've got 11 in this beautiful maroon color, and then we've got the 6mm rounds and 4mm rounds in this beautiful silver gray shell pearl. Again, it's exactly the same technique as our right angled weave. So I've got a size 12 needle, which I've threaded with some black fire line, and I'm going to pick up 4 of our 6mm rounds. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. So these are in place of our 8/0 seed beads from the first tutorial. So I'm going to slide these down, leave a tail of about 6 inches to attach a clasp later on. I'm going to feed that down, and then we're going to tie a single knot followed by another. So you can see we've got a shell pearl picot, we've got our diamond. So exactly the same right angled weave. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew away through 2 to get away from the knot. So I don't want to tangle up in the tail that we leave. And then we're going to repeat the technique from the first chapter. So we're going to pick up 3 of our 6mm rounds. 1, 2, 3. We're going to go round the back and through the gemstone that we're exiting. Pull that through, and there we have our second little diamond, our second picot. So as we know, we're in the wrong place. We need to be at this exterior shell pearl at the end. So we're just going to follow the direction that the thread is taking us. So through 1, turn 90 degrees, our right angle into the exterior. Pull that nice and tight, and you can see now that we've got our 2 diamonds. So we'll do a few more of these. So every time it's going to be 3. So 1, then 2, and then 3. We're going to go round the back and through the bead that we're exiting. Pull that through, nice and tight. And then we're going to turn our work. Again, we're in the wrong place. We need to be at the exit point. So I'm just going to sew through, following that 90-degree turn to make our right angles. Playing that nice and tight. So we'll do 2 more and then we'll start embellishing. So picking up 1 and 2 and 3. So we've got our 3 around the back of the bead we're exiting, and sew through. Putting that nice and tight, just giving it a little wiggle. Flipping our work over, sewing away from us through the first bead we encounter, and then exiting at the end. Pulling that nice and tight. So what you would do now is you would continue with your right angled weave until you got to the length of your desired bracelet, but just remembering that you're going to be adding a seed bead loop and a clasp at either end. So maybe just take off 1 inch off your full measurement. So now we're going to start incorporating our seed beads, and at this end, so we're imagining that we've made our full length, we're going to make our seed bead loop. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to go to our 11/0s. I've gone for this beautiful maroon colour which matches perfectly against the silver, and I'm going to pick up 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of our 11/0s. I'm going to go round the outside of that last shell pearl, and I'm going to sew back through, pulling that nice and tight. And what you can see now is you get this little arc of 11/0 seed beads at the very end. I'm going to flip it over because I always like to work away from me, and I'm going to sew through 3 of those 11/0s, so I'm coming up in the middle of that group of 5, pulling that nice and tight. And then I'm going to pick up 8 11/0s, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to, again, this is another right angled weave, so I'm exiting that middle 11/0. I'm going to go round the back of the bead that I'm exiting, sew back through it, and sew through the 3 11/0s. So I'm sewing away from me diagonally. And then when I pull nice and tight, you can now see that I've got a seed bead loop at this end that we're going to attach our jump ring and our clasp to at the end of the technique. So we've added our seed bead loop, so now it's the fun bit. It's now time to start doing our embellishments. So you can see that I'm exiting back through the arc that we left at the seed bead loop. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to now turn my work sideways, and we're going to fill in all the gaps down the sides of our work. So you can see there's a gap here between our exit point and the drill hole of the shell pearl, and I think that's probably going to be 3 11/0s. So first of all, we're going to pick up 3, And then we're going to jump from this seed bead into the the shell pearl on that right hand side. So let's have a look if our, yes, perfect, look. So that fills that gap nice and neatly. And then what we're going to do then is we're going to fill in the gaps between our shell pearl, and I can see that it's going to be 2. So I'm picking up 2 11s and sewing into the next shell pearl. So pull that through. Perfect, you can see that fits nice and neatly in between the shell pearls there. So we know it's going to be 2. So I'm going to go all the way down that side with 2, and then fill the last gap with 2, like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to jump up to the shell pearl on the exterior point, because we're going to do our second seed bead loop. So we know it's going to be 5. So that's our 5. We're going to go round the back and through. Again, I'm going to turn my work because I like working away from me. I'm going to sew up through 3, so I'm exiting through that middle point, pulling that nice and tight. We've already worked out there's going to be 8 for our seed bead loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Going to go around the back, down through the 3, like so. So that's our second seed bead loop. And then this will then get me in the position to fill in the gap down the side that we've got missing, which we know is going to be 3. So I'm just going to sew into that shell pearl, pulling that nice and tight. So now you can see we've got enclosed sides containing the 2, and we've got the 3 on this side. So what we want to do now is we want to get back up to this corner to do that other side. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go round the back of the beading. So our thread is going to catch. So that's nice and caught. I heard a little pop, and then we're going to sew up through the shell pearl. Again, I'm going to turn my work over so I'm working away. I'm going to sew through the shell pearl, which is nicely caught. Then I'm going to sew through the 11 O's of our little arc that we had all the way around our top shell pearl, through the next 3, like so. And now we already know that this gap between our 11 O seed bead loop and our first shell pearl is 3. We've already worked that out. So 1, 2, 3 into the shell pearl, pull that through, and then we know that all the gaps down the exterior points are 2s. So we're going to go down through the first shell pearl we encounter, and then we're going to pick up 2 into the next shell pearl, and then pick up 2. 1 and 2. And we've got the gap at the top, which we know is going to be filled with 3 11 O's. So 1, 2 and 3. So again, we're going to sew through all of those 11 O's that form part of that seed bead loop, all the way down the side. And we're going to exit all of the 11 O's, and we're going to exit just before that first shell pearl that you can see there. So that's our first row of embellishments. So we've added our seed bead loop, top and bottom, and then we've got our seed bead arc at the top, and then we've filled in the gaps down the side with 2. I'm just going to cut my little tail off. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to embellish the sides of our shell pearl. And the combination for this embellishment is going to be the following. So as you can see here on this picture, you can see the bracelet. So we've just added the side 2 beads, and now we're going to add in the little gemstones down the middle, incorporating the arcs. So I'm going to do that next. So first of all, we're going to pick up 2 11 O's, and then we're going to incorporate our smaller gemstones. These are 4mm rounds, and they're the perfect size for what we're about to do. So 2 11s, then a 4mm, and then 2 11s. And what we're going to do is we're going to go around the outside and sew into the 2 11 O's that we have in between the shell pearls. So I'm just going to sew through. So you can see now we've got this little arc if I lay it down. So we've got our little arc with our little shell pearl popping out, okay? So we're going to continue that all the way down at the side. So 2 11s, one of our 4mm rounds, and then 2 of our 11s. We're going to go round the outside of the shell pearl into the 2 11-0s. Pull nice and tight. Then we're going to repeat, so 2 11s, one of our 4mm rounds, 2 11s, round the outside into the next group of 2. Then we're going to do our last on this side. So pick up 2 11s and a 4mm round, 2 11s, round the outside, and then we're going to sew through that little section of seed beads at the end. And this is really nice because you're actually strengthening probably the weakest part of the design, that seed bead loop end. So we're just going to sew all the way through until we get to the last of our 11-0s in that group. Okay, so we're now at this point. So we're nearly there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to flip these little side sections over, and you can see that that little 4mm round is in exactly the right position down the centre of our work. And the way we're going to join that together is the following, and it's the final little section I'm going to show you. So we're going to repeat the number of seed beads that we used. So we had 2 11-0s. The 4mm round is already there, so I'm just going to sew through that. So you're just going to pull that across, and that will sit diagonally across the gap. So if I lay that down flat, you can see that it sits beautifully on top of our work. Then we're going to pick up 2, because remember it was 2 shell 2, and we're going to go diagonally across into the 2 beads down the right hand side. And again, we're going to pull that nice and tight. So if I sit that flat, you can see now we've got this beautiful cross with an exterior 4mm round at the top. So we're going to repeat this all the way down. So I'm going to fold my work across. I'm going to pick up 2 11s. I'm going to go diagonally across into the shell pearl, the 4mm that's already there. I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And then I'm going to do the second side, which is 2 11s. Go diagonally across into the 2 11s that are down the side. So next section, fold across. Then we're going to pick up 2, go diagonally across into the shell pearl that's already there. And I'm using shell pearl 4mm rounds, but there's nothing stopping you using bicones if you want a bit of a bling, or crystals or glass, or it's all about experimenting. That's why we love making jewellery, because we can have fun, and if we're not happy with the completed result, we dismantle it and start again, make something else. That's the joy of it. Fold over our last little section, pick up 2, into the shell pearl in the centre, pull nice and tight, and we can go into diagonally across to the seed beads that are already there, which is part of our loop. So if I lay that down nice and flat, you can see we've got this beautiful scallop pattern all the way down, and if I turn it onto its sides, you can see our 4mm rounds pop along the top, giving that beautiful, beautiful look if I turn it round. So that's what it will look like on the wrist. It's absolutely beautiful. So you can stop here if you want to, or if we look at the bracelets on here, you can see that some of them I've made another row of arcs around the outside edges. Some of the white ones there, you can see that it really does make a bit of a statement against the amethyst there. And the wider blue one, what I've done is instead of doing 2 sets of pico, I've done 3. So we've got 3 rows instead of 2 with that blue one. It's just a wider cuff. And as I said, you can incorporate it with other gemstones, with larger seed beads, or as I said, for that bit of bling, you can incorporate your little bicones down the side. And then to finish off, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue to sew through my seed beads at the loop and through my shell pearl. If I just flip that over. So I'm going through my seed beads up to this point, and then I'm just going to sew through the back. This is the back of the first shell pearl And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew round and through, and just keep going until you find that it's really tough to get your needle through your shell pearl. And at that point, what you would do then is you would cut your thread. I'll just bring one of the bracelets across and I'll show you what I've done to the back. So you can see here that we've got, if I lay this down here, so I've got my little 4mm rounds I've used instead. If I flip this over, so you can see the right angled weave in effect beautifully using a smaller pearl. If you want to go more dainty, instead of using the 6mm rounds, drop down a size to the 4mm round. And then we've got our little crossover going down the centre of the bracelet. And then right at the end, I've taken some jump rings and in this case a bolt ring clasp to add the finish to the bracelet. So that's very, very strong. We've gone through the beads 2 or 3 times just to provide that bit of extra strength. And I think you can take it from me that these bracelets are absolutely beautiful, incredibly addictive, and the main feature is your right angled weave. So that's quite a few bits and pieces with our right angled weave we've covered. And what we're going to do now is move on to the next stage, which is called CRAW, which stands for cubic right angled weave. Welcome back, everyone. In this particular chapter, we're going to be moving on from our right angled weave and we're going to be entering the world of CRAW, which stands for cubic right angled weave. Now, unlike right angled weave, which is absolutely perfect for flat designs, i.e. bracelets, CRAW is absolutely beautiful if you want to make a rope. So the pieces that I've got to my left here, we've got these beautiful earrings in the metallic colours, the beautiful blue, and then this absolutely gorgeous ombre green bracelet. Now, if you look closely, you can see the right angled weave. You can see the little diamond picots, especially on the little bracelet there. So you can see that the natural progression from your flat to your tube is probably the best place to head for next. So that's what I'm going to show you. So I'm going to be using 80 seed beads, and I've got it in 3 colours. I've got them in my 3 favourite metallic colours. And we're going to start with the gold, then the gunmetal, and then moving on to the silver, and we're going to be alternating through the 3 colours. But again, because we're going to be making a tubular style rope, have fun with colours, have fun with textures, and have fun with metal or bold colours. Go monochrome if you want to. The world is your oyster. So I've got a size 12 needle and I've threaded on a piece of black fireline. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to replicate the first set of right angled weave sections from our previous chapter. So I'm going to pick up 4 of my gold. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to slide that down, leave a little tail just to hold on to while you start your tube. And as many of us seed beaders know, the first couple of moves and the first couple of rounds on seed beading is always a bit fiddly. So we're going to take our thread, we're going to tie a single knot, followed by a double knot. So that's now nice and secure. Okay, so that, if we look down from above, is our first little diamond, our first picot. Then we're going to sew away from the knot, as we have been doing in previous tutorials. So I'm going to sew through 1 and I'm going to sew through 2. So we're now away from the knot. So a bit of right angled weave to start. So I'm exiting the 80. I'm going to pick up another 3 of my gold. I'm going to sew round the back and up through the bead that we're exiting. Pulling that nice and tight. So you can now see we've got our 2 diamonds. We're in the wrong position, we need to be on that exterior bead, so I'm going to sew through 2 8/0s, turning at my 90-degree right angles, so I'm exiting the last bead of that round. So you can see now we've got our 2 diamonds. So we're going to pick up another 3 8/0s in our gold. We're going to go round the back and up through the bead we're exiting, and then we're going to flip it over and sew through 2, so we're in our exterior point. So and through. Okay, so if I lay that down, you can see that we've got our 3 picots, our 3 diamonds. Now at this point, we need to start forming our cube, as in cubic right angled weave. So what I'm going to do to make it easier for you at home to see is I'm going to cut my tail away so it doesn't interfere. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up my 3 diamonds and I'm going to fold them in half. Literally just fold them in half. So those 2 exterior beads, one at the beginning and one at the end, are sitting parallel with each other. If I turn it sideways, you can see they stand slightly proud on the right hand side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up 1 8/0. Do you remember it's normally 3 or 4 in a picot? We've already got 2 here and here. So I'm exiting through the top. So I'm going to go across and down through the left hand side. Pull that through. And then I'm going to pick up 1 8/0, which is my 4th, and I'm going to go up through. Okay, so now you can see I have my picot on the top and I have my picots all the way around the cube. So before we can do anything else, we need to strengthen our work. So what I do is I simply sew round all of the beads, pulling nice and tight in their groups of 4. You can change directions, you can go whichever way you find easier. So I'm going to turn my work 90 degrees and I'm going to sew through this group here. You can repeat this as many times as you like. It's always good to get a nice standpoint for when you're starting your cubic. Pull that through. Let's see if there's any other loose sides I can strengthen. So let's go down this way. So pull this through. Again, I'm going to go down through. So it's always just worth spending that extra couple of moments just strengthening your work. So I think we've got all of our sides of our picots. So in effect now we have our cube. So now we're going to start our cubic right angled weave. So I'm just going to get in the right position. Let's go through. I think I'm going to go there. There we go. Okay, so we've got our lovely little picot, we've got our little bit of right angled weave, and we're exiting through the top here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to choose our second colour, which in my case is going to be the gunmetal. So I'm exiting and we're going to pick up 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go round the back and through and pull that nice and tight. So you can now see we've got our picot for our next round. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our work and I'm going to fold up to the inside that little door. It's like a little flap, a little door. I'm going to sew through the next 8/0 in the gold diamond. And just like our right angled weave, you only add 3 to the first round and then we're going to add 2. So picking up 2, I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to go down through the side bead of the gunmetal colour, which will give us our next little picot. I'm going to sew through the bead that we're exiting. And then I'm going to sew through the next 8/0. So I'm going to sew through the next 8/0, pulling that nice and tight. So you can already see now we've got 2 sections of our first cube. I'm going to pick up 2. So this is bead number 1, we're exiting. So we're going to go down through the last bead of that gunmetal colour, pull that through, and we're going to sew through our 8/0 in the gold that we were exiting. And then we're going to sew through the next 8/0. Now can you see picots have 4 beads as we've discovered. So this is bead number 1. I already have bead number 2. I already have bead number 3. So number 4 is the only bead that's missing. So I'm going to continue with that thread journey. So I'm going up and then I'm going to pick up a gunmetal and I'm going to go across and down, which will complete that little picot. So you can now see we've got our 4th picot, and then I'm going to sew through the bead that we're exiting. So you can now see we've got our gunmetal picot on top of our gold. And because we've got a couple of sections now, it's going to be a lot easier to hold on to. So what I would definitely advise doing is our last row that we've added, this gunmetal, I'm going to strengthen. So I'm just going to take my needle up through, so I meet it. And I'm going to sew through all the way around, pulling nice and tight on those 4 right angled weave beads. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it just gives it a bit more strength. And I always give 1 for luck whenever I'm doing any beading. Okay, so you can now see, if I pull that nice and tight, we've got the beginning of our right angled weave rope. So we'll move on to our next colour. So there is an analogy that a lot of people use when they're doing cubic right angled weave, and that's that they imagine that they're in a room. They imagine that there's a floor, 2 walls and a ceiling. So if that make it easier, so I'm going to talk you through this little section here. So I'm exiting through the floor. Okay, so I'm exiting through the floor. I'm going to pick up wall number 1, I'm going to pick up the ceiling, and I'm going to pick up wall number 2. So I'm exiting through the floor. I'm going to go all the way around and sew into the floor. So when I pull, you can now see, if I turn this upwards, we've got our floor, we've got our left wall, we've got our right wall, and we've got our ceiling. So every picot is going to contain those 4 elements of the room. So I'm going to sew through the next gunmetal. And as you can see, our floor is already here, and one of our walls is already here that's going to make up the 4. So I'm going to pick up the second wall, and I'm going to pick up the ceiling. So I'm going to go round, I'm going to go through the wall, and then I'm going to sew through the floor, pulling nice and tight, and you can now see that we have our second section of right angled weave. Going to sew through into the next section, pulling nice and tight. So we've already got our floor because we're exiting. We've already got one of our walls, so we're going to pick up our second wall and our ceiling. So we're going to put the wall in first, then we're going to put the ceiling, and then we're going to come down the second wall. So I'm just going to go all the way around, pulling nice and tight, sewing into the gunmetal. So in effect, we're sewing through the floor again. And you can now see that we've got our 3 sections of our cubic right angled weave. So we're at the stage now where we have 2 walls, the left and the right wall, and we've got our floor. So we need to put the ceiling on. So we're going to go through the floor. We're going to come up through wall number 1. We're going to pop the ceiling on, which is going to sit on the top, and we're going to come down through the first wall, like so. So you can now see we've got our little picot, our diamond of 4. So we're going to sew through the ceiling, through the wall, and we're going to exit through the floor. So you can see on the top there we've got our 4 picot beads. So we need to get to the top to strengthen. So I'm going to continue with the thread journey. So I'm going to come up through the wall, and then I'm going to go diagonally across to be in the position to strengthen that last cubic right angled weave section we made. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread through all 4 of the top beads. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. And as I said, I always do 1 for luck. Pull that into position nice and tight. So you can now see the cubic is starting to take effect. So in effect, if you can imagine, we've got 4 rows of right angled weave all attached to each other. So if I turn around, you can see we've got the gold, the gunmetal and the silver, gold, gunmetal and silver. So if we look at the completed version, you'll see just how quickly it builds up and how it fits nice and neatly. So I'll do 1 more row. We'll go back to the gold. So I'm exiting through the silver. Okay, so imagine that's going to be the floor. So I'm going to pick up wall number 1, the ceiling, and wall number 2. So I'm going to go round and sew back through the bead I'm exiting. So this will give us our 4. So you can see we've got 3 gold and 1 of the white. I'm going to sew through the floor, and then we're going to move on to our next section. So we've got the floor, which is what I'm exiting from, and we've got one of our walls. So we know that we're going to pick up our second wall and our floor. So I'm going to go round, all the way around into the wall, and I'm going to sew into the floor, and then I'm going to continue through into the next floor. So that's 2 sides built. Then we're going to pick up a wall and a ceiling. We're going to go round, down through the wall of the previous round, through the floor, and then we're going to sew through the floor. So you can now see that we're on our last section. We've got the floor, we've got 2 walls. All we need to do is pop on the ceiling. So I'm going to go sew up through the wall. I'm going to pick up the ceiling. I'm going to come down the wall. I'm going to sew through the floor. So I've gone all the way around. And then we're going to strengthen the row at the top. So I'm going to sew up through the wall of the section I'm working on. I'm going to go diagonally across into the first of our gold 8 O's, and then I'm just going to strengthen that extra row at the top all the way around. All the way across. So that's 4, and then that's number 5. Pulling that nice and tight, so you can now see it's all starting to make beautiful, beautiful jewellery. So what you can do, if we look at the blue earrings that I've got onto my left, you can see that we've got these little gold 11 O's going down the sides. So if we look at the piece I've just made, can you see it's quite bendy? It's got quite a lot of fluidity about it. So if you were making a bracelet that you wanted to join the 2 ends together, for example, you want it to be quite fluid to roll over the wrist, or if you were making a necklace. If you were making earrings, for example, and you wanted them to be static, what you would do is you would choose a colour of 11O, and can you see the gaps that we've got down the sides here? There's quite a bit of a, if I turn it this way, you can see the little castellations. What you would do is you would fill all of the gaps with little 11Os up to the bottom, and then you would come up the next row, filling with 11s, turn, down, filling with 11Os, across, and you go all the way around, and what you would notice is those 4 corners would be strengthened, and that would be a solid, rigid section of CRAW rather than the bendy, fluid section that we've got at the moment. And as I said, they make beautiful earrings, little tiny strips. They make incredible bracelets, and as I said, you can join the 2 ends together to form a roll-on bangle, necklaces, all sorts of things. But if you just remember the analogy where you have a floor, 2 walls, and a ceiling, you turn, you have a floor and a wall already in position from the previous rounds, so you know that you're going to add a second wall and the ceiling. You turn, wall and a ceiling, and then the final, you've got the wall, you've got the floor, you've got the wall. All you need to do is add the ceiling. You add the ceiling, you step up, you strengthen the top row of 4 on your piece of work, and then you start with your next little piece of cubic right angled weave again. So it's absolutely beautiful. It takes a little time to get used to, but once you've got it, it's the most beautiful technique. It's very, very, very relaxing, very therapeutic, and actually quite quick growing. So it's a wonderful technique to get under your belt. So we've now introduced you to right angled weave. We've now shown you cubic right angled weave, and in today's tutorial there's one more to go, and that is probably my favourite, prismatic right angled weave. So we've reached the final chapter, and it's all about PRAW, P-R-A-W, which stands for Prismatic Right Angled Weave. So cubic right angled weave, as the name suggests, you always have 4 sides. You always use 4 beads. In prismatic right angled weave, you can use absolutely any amount, any number at all. What I definitely recommend is for this particular technique is to use 2 sizes of seed beads. So incorporate your 8 O's with your 11 O's. And also, because we can do a wider tubular design, I would definitely recommend using a dowel. So you'll find it a lot easier to do your beading. So I always go for paracord. I think it's a really beautiful material to use. And you can either keep your beading on your paracord, or you can slide your sections off afterwards and you'll have your tube. I tend to find if I'm doing prismatic right angled weave freehand, it doesn't form a solid tube, it flattens and it's quite cumbersome, and especially at the beginning of your work, it does get quite tricky to not get in a pickle, to be fair. So what I'm going to show you is prismatic using paracord. This is paracord 451, which is 4mm across. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to attach a row of 8/0s. So I've gone for a beautiful matte cream. And for the particular type of paracord I'm using, you will be picking up 7 of your 8/0s. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've gone for cream in our 8/0s, and then I've gone for this beautiful lavender in our 11/0s. So I'm going to slide this down. I mean, by all means, do the technique without using a dowel, but I think seriously, if you've not done it before, and I'm very new to this as well, you'll just find it a lot easier. So I'm threading underneath the paracord. I'm tying a single knot, and don't be worried if there's a slight gap, because that will completely disappear when we start doing our threading. And then I'm going to tie a second single knot. So a simple overhand knot, pulling that nice and tight, and then I'm going to do a third, so a third single knot. And as I said, if you don't intend to keep the technique on your paracord, you can slide your tube off at the end. Okay, so we've got our 7 beads around our dowel. Again, nothing's changing. I'm going to sew away through 2 beads to get away from the knot. And again, you'll find it so much easier doing a dowel, because you can use the dowel to turn your work while you're doing your beading. Okay, so as in cubic right angled weave, we're going to use the wall, floor and ceiling analogy. So we've got our floors all the way around. These are our 8/0s. So the floors and the ceiling are going to be 8/0s, and the walls of our rooms are going to be 11/0s. So that's what we need to remember. So floor and ceiling are 8/0s, all of the walls are 11/0s. So I'm exiting the floor. I'm going to pick up a wall, the ceiling and a wall. Okay, I'm going to sew round the back of the bead I'm exiting. I'm going to sew back through it plus the following 8/0 as well. So I'm sewing through 2 8/0s, the 8/0 I'm exiting plus the next one. So when I pull, you can now see that we have our floor, our walls and our ceiling. So we're exiting an 8/0. So we've already got the floor, which we're exiting, and we've already got the first wall. We added that in our previous row. So from now on, right through to the very end, we're going to be adding 2 beads. We're going to be adding a wall and a ceiling. We're going to go round and we're going to sew through the wall that was there before, plus the floor, plus the next floor. So we're always going to sew through the floor we're exiting, plus another floor. We're going to turn our work. We're going to pick up a wall and the ceiling. We're going to go round the back, through the wall that's there, through the floor, through the next floor. Pull that nice and tight. You can start to see now already it's starting to form, and that's because we're using the dowel as support. We're going to pick up a wall and the ceiling. We're going to go round through the wall that's there and the floor and the next floor. So in effect, this is a step up, if you like. So we're going to pull that nice and tight. We're going to pick up a wall and a ceiling. We're going to sew round through the wall that's there and the floor and the next floor. Then we're going to pick up a wall, the ceiling. We're going to go through the wall that's there and the floor and the next floor. So this is our final section. Now, can you see we've got our floor, which is the bead we're exiting. We've already got 2 walls. All that's missing is the ceiling from the middle. So the first section is always 3 beads, then it's 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, until we get to the end where it's 1. So we need to be in position to pop the ceiling in. So we're going to take our needle and we're going to go up through the wall that's already there, pulling that nice and tight, and then we're going to join it all together with a ceiling. So we're going to pick up our ceiling and we're going to go down through the wall that's there, pulling that nice and tight, and then we're going to go up through the floor, and then I like to get back up to where I started. So I'm going to come up through, making sure that's pulled nice and tight. Okay, and then I'm going to pull nice and tight. And then what I like to do is I like to strengthen the row. So all I do is I go through the beads all the way around. That just gives it a bit of added strength. So what I'm doing is just going all the way around, pulling nice and tight as I'm going. And you can already see it's taking shape. I'm going to keep going round until we get to the first bead. Pulling that nice and tight. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start our next round. So we're exiting the floor. So we're going to pick up a wall, the ceiling and a wall. So it's always 3 the first time. We're going to go round the back, through the floor, through the next floor. Then we're going to pull nice and tight. Then we're going to pick up our next. So we've got the wall and the floor already. So we're going to pick up another wall and the ceiling. Going to go round, through the wall, through the floor, through the next floor, pulling that nice and tight. Wall, ceiling, round, through the wall, through the floor, through the floor. Pulling that nice and tight. Then wall, ceiling, round the back, through the wall that's there, and the floor, and the next floor. Pulling nice and tight. So it's always remembering just to check which walls and ceiling and floor you already have, and then just fill in the missing gaps. And then we're going to sew through, pulling nice and tight. Coming up to our last section shortly. So we're going to go through, and through the next floor. And we're at the point now, can you see, where we have our floor, our 2 walls, but no ceiling. So we need to get into the position to add our ceiling. So I'm going to sew up through the wall. Then I'm going to pick up the ceiling, go across and down, which will then fill in the space, and then through the ceilings, filling that nice and tight. And then we're going to continue all the way around, just tightening up. Going to go up through, we want to get back up to that working edge. Pulling that nice and tight. And then we're going to sew through our first floor, and then we're ready to start the next round. So I'm just going to pull that nice and tight. You can already quickly see how it's starting to build up. So we'll do one more round. So I'm picking up a wall, a ceiling and a wall. Going to go round the back, through the floor, through the next floor. Okay, pulling that nice and tight. I'm going to pick up a wall and the ceiling. So we need to go round the back and through to make our next room. Just give that a little manipulation. So we've got our wall, our ceiling, round the back through, and remember to go through an extra floor, pull that nice and tight. One, round the back, through the wall, through the floor that's already there. Again, pulling that nice and tight. So we've got an 11/0 and an 8/0, round the back, through and through the extra floor. And you can see just how important it is to have a dowel, I think, with this particular technique. It just proves so easy to keep everything nice and taut. And then we're going to sew up through, because we want to pop in our last ceiling. So I'm just going to sew and up through. There we go, and then we've just got our last section to pop in. So your prismatic right angled weave, you can use any number of beads. Your cubic has to be 4, as the name suggests, and then your right angle weave can be your single. So I'm just going to pull this through nice and tight, and then I'm going to sew up through. Going to go either to the left or the right, depending on which way you want to work, and then you're in the position then pulling nice and tight to start your next row. So you can see just how beautiful this design looks. So if I bring a bracelet across, this is a bracelet. Again, I've used paracord as a base for my bracelet. So what I've done is I've made my little cone ending and I've popped on a clasp. Now I've used the cone ending, I used 0.8mm wire. I've made the cone, I've popped the paracord through, and then can you see I've just folded over the last coil to attach it to the paracord. You can pop some little pieces, a little drop of glue in if you rather as well, just to strengthen it. But you can see you still have that amazing fluidity. If we didn't have the paracord running through the center, you'd be able to squish, you'd be able to flatten the tube. So for me, I think this is a beautiful technique when you're going to be using paracord, but you've still got that amazing fluidity and movement. And then I'll just bring one of the necklaces across. If I bring this one across here. So again, this is on the paracord. And what I've done here is I've made little stations, these are called stations. And I've used gunmetal as the background colour and alternated the colours of the lavenders. And what I've done on here, some of them actually move. So you can actually move them into position if you want to. Okay, so these are really beautiful. Can you see you get that beautiful concertina? So they can slide, and you can decide on how you want to position your little beads. So all you would do is when you got to this section that I showed you the completion of, all you would do is you would just sew round your row of ceilings, pulling nice and tight. So you just continue all the way around, not adding any 11/0s in between, because you want to replicate the row we had at the beginning, which if you remember was solely your 8/0s. So we're just going to go all the way around, all the way around. And this just pulls everything nice and tight and concertinas. And you can just keep going if you want to until you can't get the needle through anymore, or you can tie off. So you can either, at this point, keep these little stations on your paracord. As you can see, they slide. You can move them along to any position you want, or you can slide it right off the end. Let's do that, shall I? You can pull it right off the end. Let's cut the paracord there. Let's cut that off. So you can pull it off, and there you have your open station. And as you can see, you can flatten it if you didn't have the dowel running through the center. So what you could do is make lots of these and thread them onto wire, or you could run a 15/0 seed bead necklace through and having these little sections slide. Or, as I've done with the bracelet, you can have a solid rope. You can join the two ends together if you wanted to and have a rollover bangle. So again, it's an incredibly versatile technique, and I think we've just touched the tip of the iceberg with your right angled weave. And there are lots of others right angled weave techniques out there, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point in the JewelleryMaker Academy. So I think we've covered everything we're going to be covering today. We've covered your right angled weave, which produces your flat work. Then we've moved on to cubic right angled weave to make your beautiful tubular designs for your necklaces and your ropes. And then I've just shown you my favorite, the PRAW, the Prismatic Right Angled Weave, which you can make little stations, you can make full necklaces, full bracelets, and you can make your little abacus beads if you want to, which you can slide to any position that you want. So as I said, thank you very much for joining me in today's tutorial, learning all about right angled weave, and make sure you tune in and look on the website and see which other tutorials we've got coming up. I've got a lot in the pipeline, so make sure that you pop along to the website and have a look. My name's been Mark Smith. I'm part of the JewelleryMaker Academy team, and I can't wait to see you again for future tutorials.